Jesus went to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, also called the Sea of Tiberias. A large crowd kept following him because they saw the signs that he was doing for the sick. Jesus went up the mountain and sat down there with his disciples. Passover, the feast of the Jews, was near. When he looked up and saw a large crowd coming toward him, Jesus said to Philip, "Where are we to buy bread for these people to eat?" He said this to test him, for he himself knew what he was going to do. Philip answered him, 6 months' wages could not buy enough bread for each of them to get a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There is a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what are they among so many people?" Jesus said, "Make the people sit down." Now there was a great deal of grass in the place, so they sat down, about 5,000 in all. Then Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated. Also with the fish, as much as they wanted. When they were satisfied, he told his disciples, "Gather up the fragments left over, so that nothing may be lost." So they gathered them up, and from the fragments of the 5 barley loaves left by those who had eaten, they filled 12 baskets. When the people saw the sign that he had done, they began to say, "This is indeed the prophet who is to come into the world." When Jesus realized that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, he withdrew again to the mountain by himself. When evening came, his disciples got into a boat and started across the sea to Capernaum. It was dark now, and Jesus had not yet come to them. The sea became rough because a strong wind was blowing. When they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea and coming near the boat. They were terrified. But he said to them, "It is I, do not be afraid." Then they wanted to take him into the boat, and immediately the boat reached the land toward which they were going. The Gospel of the Lord. Okay. I need to make sure I have a tissue in case I had issues. Okay, now after that long reading, let us bow our heads and settle our hearts with a short prayer. Dear Lord, thank you for the story of feeding the 5,000, showing us how a little faith can feed many. Amen. What is it with meals and Jesus? Jesus turned water into wine at a wedding feast, feeding 5,000 people with bread and fish. Meals are all over the Bible, from Passover to simple meals, to the fatted calf for a returning son, to the person who invited the poor and hungry to eat at his table. Jesus had a meal with people he shared the road with, and he gave us the remembrance of him at a meal. Meals seem to have a special impact with Jesus, just as it seems to with us. Think about it. How many memories do you have that have revolved around meals? We have a meal of some sort at happy occasions, birthdays, baptisms, confirmations, graduations, weddings, and anniversaries of all sorts. We have meals for Memorial Day, 4th of July, Labor Day, and I'm sure we all have memories of family gatherings for Thanksgiving and Christmas. The good, the bad, and the ugly. I have wonderful memories of family gatherings at my grandma's whenever we came to visit her. My dad was the only one of 10 children to move far away from her, but she always made us feel welcomed and loved when we got there. And how Grandma and the aunts would make enough food for an army, except for my Aunt Evelyn, who always would bring Kentucky Fried Chicken instead of making something. The breaking of bread. We see it with our children when we make it a point to sit down and eat a meal with them on a daily basis. That was one thing Alan and I agreed about when we first got married, that we would sit at the table and eat supper together every day that we could. We continued that once we had children, and as our children grew up, to count on having that time with Mom and Dad every day. Well, until they got to be teenagers. The breaking of bread. Jesus was always trying to get to know people. Excuse me. And I have a friend in McHenry that lives that by meeting with another lady at the IHOP, and they purposely sit as close to the hostess as possible. And as people come in and are asked how many, and if the answer is just one or just me, these two ladies pop up and will say that person is with them. And if the person is willing, friends. Alan and I have also taken that part to heart. As a lot of you know, we have gone to Guatemala for a number of years to build houses. We would get to Guatemala City a day early and spend the time getting reacquainted with our friends who had been there before. And with the new ones coming on their first build. On the first night we'd get into the Zacapa area, we have a meal with the family that we would be building a home for. That night can be a little stilted as we do, but as each day at the work site, we would eat lunch with our new family, and as each day goes by, we become closer and closer, working and eating together. By the time we have our final big party meal together, we have bonded in a way that cannot be replaced, and all over a meal. We would also take a couple of days and spend time relaxing with our friends in Antigua, Guatemala. We would scatter, doing different things during the day, sightseeing in the village, going on a hike to the volcano. But at the end of the day, we would be back together to have supper together. At one of these first meals, Dr. Clarence Freed told us how going on this build helped him to see that he could go on his dream medical mission trip. A trip to Haiti, helping with the sick. As it would happen, Clarence went on his trip. He arrived in Haiti on January 11th, 2010. He and his group got to the site of an orphanage that the group had worked with before. Haiti had a major earthquake on January 12th. God and the Holy Spirit put Clarence where he was most needed in the world that day and in the time that followed until he was finally able to go home. Ask us to share a story or two that Clarence shared with us. The breaking of bread. Jesus also spent time with the lonely and the hungry, healing them and feeding them. Sometimes as we'd be driving into Woodstock and at the corner of a sign asking for a job or for food. As we did our thing in Woodstock, Alan would often stop at McDonald's, Burger King, Wendy's, and get a meal with a drink and stop and give it to the person on our way back. A lot of times when we go into Chicago, I finally got Alan to give food coupons to the beggars so that they could get something to eat instead of just giving them money. Once Alan went into Chicago to a Bulls game with his niece Becky. He was making a night of it with her, and while they were at the place where they'd stopped to eat, Becky had noticed someone who wanted to order a meal but did not have enough money. So Alan and Becky ordered their meals and then ordered another one. After getting their meals, Alan gave the extra meal to the person. He said that the look of gratitude on that person's face tore at his heart, and it made a big impression on Becky that her uncle had thought to share. Even recently, while in Clarksville's favorite Amish bakery, I had picked up a loaf of fresh, soft sourdough bread for my mom, his mom, and one for ourselves. As I walked away, Alan picked up another, the last loaf of bread. I asked him why the fourth loaf, and he just said, "I don't know." I just went along with it. We went around that morning, running errands and smelling the bread in the back seat. As we went to get on to the interstate, there at the turn for the entrance was a person with all of her belongings, holding a sign saying, "We'll work for food." Alan and I looked at each other and I said, "Well, I guess we know now why you picked up that loaf of bread." As we came to her, Alan handed her the bread. The breaking of bread. We see the sharing of meals with some businesses. One company I used to work for in Massachusetts would have a cookout once a month from May to October. The gathering of people other than work. Or having a meal together while making plans for the future of the company. A lot of companies have annual picnics and holiday parties, while they and others might also have a customer appreciation day where there are snacks, cookies out, and a little bit of talking too. While working for Aero Defense Components, we would just decide to take a lunch and make it a potluck and maybe use the grill we had out in the warehouse. We would all sit at a table and take lunch together that day and catch up with each other, more in the summer than in the winter. The breaking of bread. We also see it in our church. During the Sunday school season, our middle schoolers will fix a breakfast for us to share and to raise money for a cause. The food pantry, a trip to Lutherdale. The same thing with the confirmands and the high schoolers, especially with the dinner theater. Or we will have a potluck after we do our annual church meeting or on Polka Sunday. We also have members of the community join us, occasions in which the church family can bond over preparing, working, eating the meal. The breaking of bread. I see it when communion is given to our church members. I sometimes watch as communion is given out and as different people come forward. I especially love watching the little ones, being so bouncy and excited as they wait to either get a blessing or a bite of the bread, and seeing their faces to receive it. To the older kids trying to be adult about getting communion, but actually wanting to be like the little ones. As Pastor Debbie is trying to learn everyone's name so that she gives the bread to each person by name. Bread to each person by name. The breaking of bread. Jesus, over a meal, gave us the remembrance of him. Luke 22:19 through 20. And he took bread, gave thanks, and broke it, and gave it to the body given for you. Do this in remembrance of me. Again, after the supper, he took the cup, gave thanks, and gave it all to drink, saying, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood, shed for you and for all people, for the forgiveness of sin. Do this in remembrance of me." Giving us a ritual to remember him by, as he knew the end was coming up fast. And in some ways, we keep that as we would have a meal after the passing of someone. To remember a father, a mother, brother, sister, child, other family members, and friends. The sharing of love, joy, happiness, sadness, and tears. We gather to share our stories of the person just like the two people on the road to Emmaus did after having the meal with Jesus and the 5,000, talking about the breaking of bread. As you leave here today, think about how you can use the breaking to pass on the discipleship and faith of Jesus. How will you break